What happens when your perfect marriage explodes live on Instagram in front of 500,000 viewers? Sarah Mitchell thought she knew her husband until she discovered his affair during an accidental live stream. But cheating was just the beginning. David had been planning something far more sinister for 2 years, a criminal conspiracy that would frame Sarah for embezzlement and leave her facing 20 years in federal prison. Just when all hope seemed lost, a mysterious stranger appeared claiming to be her biological father, a billionaire oil tycoon with the power to destroy empires. This is the shocking true story of betrayal, survival, and the ultimate revenge. If you love stories about justice prevailing against impossible odds, so hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales. Drop a comment below. Have you ever discovered a betrayal that changed everything? Let's dive into Sarah's unbelievable journey. Sarah Mitchell was folding laundry in her pristine Malibu kitchen when her world exploded across 500,000 phone screens. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as she mindlessly sorted David's designer shirts, the same routine she had followed for 15 years of marriage. Her phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Amber Rose was going live again. Sarah rolled her eyes but tapped the notification anyway. The 26-year-old actress had been posting increasingly desperate content lately, clearly trying to boost her failing career with lifestyle content and morning routines. The live stream opened to Amber's perfectly lit bedroom, all white sheets and carefully arranged succulents. "Good morning, beautiful souls," Amber purred into her ring light. "Let me show you my incredible morning skincare routine." Sarah was about to swipe away when something in the background caught her attention. A familiar laugh. A man's voice saying something about coffee. The comments section was exploding. "Is that a man's voice? Girl, who is that?" Amber spilled his tea. Amber's face went pale as she glanced off camera. She quickly moved to block the view, but it was too late. In the mirror behind her bed, clear as daylight, stood David Carter, Sarah's husband, shirtless, stretching like he had just woken up in another woman's bed. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, dropping the laundry basket. The comments were going insane. "That's David Carter, the tech CEO. Isn't he married? This is wild." Amber fumbled with her phone, trying to end the stream, but the damage was done. 500,000 people had just witnessed Sarah's marriage imploding in real time. Sarah screenshotted everything before Amber could delete it. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. Screenshots were already being shared across Twitter and TikTok. Had David Carter exposed was trending within minutes. Her phone rang. "David." "Sarah, I can explain." His voice was tight with panic. "Explain what exactly?" Sarah's voice was surprisingly calm. "Explain why you're half naked in Amber Rose's bedroom at 8 in the morning. Explain why 500,000 people just watched you cheat on me live." "It's not what it looks like." Sarah laughed, a bitter sound that surprised her. "David, the entire internet saw exactly what it looks like. There are already memes. We need to talk. I'm coming home. Don't bother. I think we've said everything we need to say." Sarah hung up and immediately called her old college roommate, Kate Morrison, now one of the top divorce attorneys in Los Angeles. "Kate, I need help. David's been having an affair and it just went viral." "Slow down. What happened?" Sarah explained about the live stream while pulling up news articles that were already appearing online. Entertainment Weekly had published a piece within 30 minutes. TMZ was calling it the live stream scandal of the year. "Sarah, this is actually good for you," Kate said. "Public infidelity voids most prenup clauses. We can take him for everything." For the first time that morning, Sarah felt a spark of hope. Maybe this humiliation could be turned into freedom. But as she hung up the phone, Sarah had no idea that David had been planning this moment for 2 years, and that the real betrayal was only beginning. David's Tesla pulled into their circular driveway at exactly 10:30. Sarah watched from the living room window as he sat in the car for several minutes, probably rehearsing his lies. She had spent the last 2 hours documenting everything. Screenshots of the live stream, photos of their joint accounts, a list of their shared assets. Kate had taught her well during their college years when they studied business together. Always be prepared. David walked through the front door looking like he was attending a funeral. His usually perfect hair was disheveled. His $500 shirt wrinkled. For a man who built his entire image on being in control, he looked completely lost. "Sarah, we need to talk about this rationally." Rationally, Sarah set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "David, you've been sleeping with a 26-year-old actress and the entire world found out through her Instagram Live. What part of this situation calls for rationality?" David loosened his tie, a nervous habit she had noticed more frequently over the past year. It just happened. Amber and we connected at that charity gala last month. She understood the pressures I'm under. The pressures you're under. Sarah's voice rose, despite her efforts to stay calm. What about the pressures I'm under? Do you think being married to you has been easy? Do you think I don't understand pressure? You don't understand what it's like to run a company like mine. The decisions I have to make every day. The weight of it all. Sarah stared at the man she had supported through every career milestone, every late night, every business crisis. I've been by your side for 15 years, David. I gave up my marketing career to be your wife. I've hosted your clients, supported your dream, and never asked for anything in return. I know, and I'm grateful. But Sarah, this isn't just about the affair. David's expression hardened. Amber's pregnant. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had to grip the back of the sofa to stay standing. Pregnant, 4 months, we're having a baby. Sarah felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. For years, she and David had tried to have children. Expensive fertility treatments, crushing disappointments. David eventually convincing her that maybe it wasn't meant to be, that they were complete as they were. How long, she whispered. The baby or the affair? Both. David walked to their bar cart and poured himself a whiskey. At 10:30 in the morning. The affair started 6 months ago. The pregnancy happened around Christmas. Christmas. While Sarah was planning their holiday party, David was creating a new family with someone else. Sarah, I want a divorce. She had expected this, but hearing it out loud still felt like drowning. Of course you do. I've already filed the papers. My lawyer will contact Kate today. Sarah felt her temporary strength crumbling. You filed already when? Yesterday, before the live stream. I was planning to tell you this weekend, but Amber's mistake accelerated everything. Mistake. He called exposing their affair a mistake, not the affair itself. What about our prenup? Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. David's expression was almost pitying. Sarah, you signed a very comprehensive agreement. In case of divorce, you keep your personal belongings and $50,000. That's it. The number felt surreal. $50,000 after 15 years of marriage, after giving up her career, her independence, her identity. I built this empire, Sarah. Carter Technologies is worth $200 million. The house, the cars, the investments, they're all in my name. You'll be fine. You're smart. You can rebuild. Sarah looked around their home. The art they had collected together, the furniture she had chosen, the life she had built, all of it belonged to him. You've been planning this for months, haven't you? Getting your finances in order, making sure everything was protected. David didn't deny it. I'm not a fool, Sarah. I know how these things work. As Sarah watched her husband pack his belongings, she realized she wasn't just losing her marriage. She was losing everything. Her home, her financial security, her social circle, her entire identity. But what she didn't know was that David's betrayal went far deeper than infidelity. And the $50,000 he was leaving her with was about to disappear entirely. 3 days after David moved out, Sarah sat in Kate's Beverly Hills office, trying to piece together the remains of her life. The media storm was relentless. Paparazzi camped outside her house. Entertainment news shows dissected every detail of her marriage. Social media buzzed with opinions about the live stream scandal. The good news is that David's public affair gives us grounds to challenge the prenup, Kate explained, spreading documents across her mahogany desk. Adultery clauses typically void these agreements in California. Sarah felt her first moment of hope since the live stream. So I could get half of everything. Potentially more. Carter Technologies has been incredibly successful. We're talking about a settlement worth potentially $50 to $100 million. The number seemed impossible. Sarah had grown up middle class in Phoenix. Her father was a high school teacher, her mother a nurse. Even after 15 years of wealth, she still felt like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. There's something else, Kate continued. I've been reviewing your personal finances. You have access to your own checking account with about $52,000. That should cover your immediate expenses while we fight this. Sarah nodded, feeling slightly more stable. $50,000 wasn't much compared to David's fortune, but it was enough to survive while the legal battle played out. I want you to document everything, Kate instructed. Every asset, every account, every business relationship. David's going to try to hide money, and we need to be ready. Sarah spent the next week creating a comprehensive inventory. She photographed jewelry, documented art purchases, and compiled 15 years of financial records. The process was therapeutic, giving her a sense of purpose amid the chaos. She also started receiving messages of support. Old friends from her marketing days reached out. College classmates shared encouraging words. Even some of David's business associates quietly expressed their disapproval of his behavior. For the first time since the live stream, Sarah felt like she might survive this. She even started imagining her future. Maybe she could return to marketing. Maybe she could start her own consulting firm. Maybe this disaster could become a new beginning. That optimism lasted exactly 1 week. Sarah was having coffee with her neighbor Linda when her phone buzzed with an emergency alert from her bank. Insufficient funds for her grocery store purchase. That's impossible, she told Linda, pulling up her banking app. Her checking account showed a balance of negative $1,500. Panicked, she called the bank. According to their records, someone had authorized a wire transfer of $53,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands the previous evening. Ma'am, our records show you initiated this transfer yourself through our secure online portal at 11:47 p.m. I was asleep at 11:47 p.m. I never authorized any transfer. The transfer was authenticated with your username, password, and the security questions you established when you opened the account. Sarah's blood ran cold. David had access to all her passwords. They had shared a password manager for their entire marriage, something he had insisted on for security purposes. She hung up and immediately called Kate, but before she could explain the situation, her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw 2 FBI agents holding badges. Mrs. Carter, we have a warrant to search these premises regarding suspected embezzlement from Carter Technologies. Sarah's world tilted. There must be some mistake. I don't work for Carter Technologies. Ma'am, our investigation shows evidence of unauthorized transfers from corporate accounts to your personal accounts over the past 18 months. They pushed past her into the house carrying boxes and computer equipment. Sarah watched helplessly as they seized her laptop, her phone, and boxes of financial documents. You have the right to remain silent, one agent said, though they weren't arresting her yet. We strongly recommend you contact an attorney. After they left, Sarah sat alone in her ransacked living room, trying to process what had happened. In one morning, she had lost her money, her privacy, and apparently her freedom. Her house phone rang. David. Sarah, I heard about the FBI visit. I'm sorry this is happening. You're sorry, David. They think I've been embezzling from your company. I know, it's terrible. Someone's obviously trying to frame you. Something in his voice made Sarah pause. Too practiced, too prepared. David, did you do this? How could you even ask that, Sarah? We may be getting divorced, but I would never try to hurt you like this. But as Sarah hung up the phone, she realized with growing horror that David absolutely would hurt her like this, and that her ex-husband had been planning her destruction for much longer than she had ever imagined. Jake Brooks had been investigating Carter Technologies for 6 months when the live stream scandal broke. As an investigative journalist for the Los Angeles Times, he had developed a nose for corporate fraud, and something about David Carter's meteoric rise had always seemed too perfect. The FBI raid on Sarah Carter's house caught his attention immediately. In his experience, when tech CEOs got divorced, they usually paid their wives quietly to avoid scrutiny. Having your ex-wife investigated for embezzlement was either incredibly stupid or incredibly calculated. Jake suspected calculated. He reached out to Sarah through a mutual contact at the Los Angeles Business Journal. They met at a small cafe in Santa Monica, far from the paparazzi still following her every move. Sarah looked exhausted. Her usually perfect blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore sunglasses despite the overcast day. But her handshake was firm and her voice was steady when she spoke. Why do you want to help me? She asked after Jake explained his investigation. Because I think your husband is running one of the biggest financial scams in tech history, and you're being set up to take the fall. Jake pulled out a thick folder. Carter Technologies claims to have developed revolutionary cloud computing algorithms. They've raised $400 million in venture capital based on these claims. David is brilliant, Sarah said carefully. His technology really is revolutionary. That's what everyone thinks. But I've been analyzing their patents and talking to former employees. The technology David claims to have invented was actually developed by a small startup in Austin 3 years ago. Jake showed her documents he had obtained through public records requests. David bought the startup for $12 million, fired all the original developers, and then claimed their work as his own innovation. Sarah studied the papers. That's not necessarily illegal, is it? Companies acquire technology all the time. Not illegal, but definitely fraudulent when you tell investors you invented it yourself. But that's not the real problem. Jake leaned forward. The real problem is that David has been using Carter Technologies as a money laundering operation. He showed her bank records obtained through his investigation. Your husband has a serious gambling addiction, Sarah. He owes approximately $15 million to some very dangerous people in Las Vegas and Macau. Sarah's face went white. That's impossible. David doesn't gamble. He's been flying to Vegas twice a month for the past 2 years. Private jet high roller suites the works. And when he started losing big, he began moving money through his company to pay his debts. Jake pulled out photographs taken by a private investigator. David at poker tables, roulette wheels, private gaming rooms. The timestamps showed dozens of trips Sarah knew nothing about. The affair with Amber Rose wasn't romantic, Jake continued. It was strategic. David needed a public scandal to distract from the financial investigation that was coming. He figured if everyone was focused on his cheating, they wouldn't notice the missing money. Sarah felt sick. But they're investigating me, not him. Because he's been very carefully creating evidence that you're the one stealing. The offshore accounts, the wire transfers, even your access to company systems. It's all designed to make you look guilty. Jake showed her more documents. David gave you administrative access to Carter Technologies' financial systems 6 months ago, remember? He said it was for insurance purposes. Sarah did remember. David had asked her to sign some paperwork saying it would help with their estate planning if something happened to him. She had signed without reading, carefully trusting her husband completely. That access is what's going to hang you, Jake said. The FBI thinks you used it to transfer money to accounts you control. But I believe David used your credentials to move money and made it look like you were responsible. Sarah sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. Why are you telling me this? Why do you care what happens to me? Jake was quiet for a moment. Because 20 years ago, my mother went through something similar. My father was stealing from his law firm and managed to make it look like she was involved. She spent 3 years in federal prison for crimes she didn't commit. I was 12 when they arrested her. He closed the folder. David Carter is a predator who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. But predators make mistakes, and I think we can catch him. Sarah looked out at the Pacific Ocean, trying to process everything Jake had told her. Her husband wasn't just a cheater. He was a criminal who had spent months setting her up to take the fall for his crimes. What do we do? She asked. We prove he's lying, Jake said. But it's going to get worse before it gets better. David's going to escalate his attacks on you because he's desperate. Are you ready for that? Sarah thought about the last 15 years of her life, the career she had given up, the dreams she had deferred, the identity she had lost in service of a man who was now trying to destroy her. I'm ready, she said. Let's catch the bastard. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later. Jake had been analyzing Carter Technologies' financial records when he discovered a pattern that proved David's guilt. Wire transfers to the Cayman Islands matched exactly with David's gambling losses in Vegas down to the day and amount. Kate immediately filed a motion to dismiss all charges against Sarah, presenting Jake's evidence to the FBI. Within 48 hours, the investigation shifted focus to David. The feds are very interested in your husband now, Kate told Sarah over lunch at Soho House. Jake's gambling evidence combined with the forensic analysis of your computer access shows a clear pattern of framing. Sarah felt lighter than she had in weeks. The constant fear of arrest was finally lifting. So the charges against me will be dropped. Completely. In fact, this strengthens our divorce case significantly. Criminal fraud voids every prenup clause imaginable. We're talking about a settlement worth potentially $200 million now. And Sarah could barely comprehend that number. $200 million would change everything. She could start her own foundation, travel the world, maybe even go back to school. For the first time since the live stream, she could imagine a future that excited her. There's more good news, Kate continued. The story is finally shifting in your favor. Jake published his investigation this morning, and public opinion is swinging hard against David. Sarah pulled up the LA Times article on her phone. The headline read, Tech CEO's gambling addiction led to massive fraud, wife framed for crimes. The article was devastating, documenting David's lies with meticulous detail. Her phone was buzzing with supportive messages. Friends who had distanced themselves during the scandal were now reaching out with apologies. Business contacts were offering meetings about potential consulting work. Even some of David's former allies were publicly condemning his behavior. That evening, Sarah decided to give her first interview since the scandal began. She chose a friendly local news station and spent an hour telling her side of the story. The interviewer was sympathetic, the questions were fair, and Sarah felt like she finally had control of her narrative. I trusted my husband completely, she said during the interview. I never imagined that he was capable of this level of deception and cruelty. But I want other women to know that you can survive betrayal. You can rebuild. You can come back stronger. The interview aired that night and was immediately picked up by national media. Sarah's phone exploded with interview requests from major networks. A literary agent contacted her about writing a book. A movie producer wanted to option her story. For 48 beautiful hours, Sarah felt like she was winning. Then Amber Rose held her own press conference. Sarah was having dinner with Kate when the breaking news alert popped up on her phone. Amber stood outside the Beverly Hills Police Department, her pregnancy clearly visible in a fitted black dress, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. I can't stay silent anymore, Amber sobbed into the microphones. Sarah Carter has been stalking and threatening me for months. She's called me horrible names, followed me to my apartment, and threatened to hurt my unborn baby. Sarah's fork clattered to her plate. What is she talking about? On screen, Amber's lawyer was presenting what appeared to be dozens of text messages and emails from Sarah's accounts. Vicious, threatening messages that grew increasingly unhinged over several months. Mrs. Carter has been completely obsessed with my client, the lawyer explained. These communications show a pattern of escalating harassment that we believe poses a real threat to Miss Rose and her child. Sarah stared at the messages being displayed on screen. They were sent from her phone number, her email addresses, even her social media accounts. But she had never sent any of them. This is impossible, she whispered. I never sent these messages. I don't even have Amber's phone number. Kate was already on her phone with their private investigator. We need a forensic analysis of all Sarah's devices immediately. This has to be fabricated. But the damage was immediate and devastating. Within hours, the hashtag AmberStrong was trending. Public opinion shifted again, this time painting Sarah as an unhinged older woman terrorizing a pregnant girl. The supportive messages stopped. The business opportunities disappeared. The media requests were all from tabloids wanting to discuss her mental breakdown. As Sarah sat in her living room watching her reputation disintegrate for the second time in 6 weeks, she realized that David had played her perfectly. Just when she thought she was safe, he had unleashed an even more devastating attack. Her phone rang, an unknown number. You didn't think it would be that easy, did you? David's voice was calm, almost amused. David, I never sent those messages. Of course you didn't, but try proving that in court. Try explaining that to the FBI when they arrest you tomorrow morning. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? Criminal harassment, stalking, making terroristic threats against a pregnant woman. That's federal charges, Sarah. Real prison time. Through her window, Sarah could see news vans arriving again. The vultures were gathering for another feeding frenzy. Why are you doing this to me? She whispered. Because you left me no choice, David said. I gave you a clean exit, $50,000 and your dignity intact. But you had to fight. You had to hire lawyers and investigators and try to destroy me. Sarah realized with growing horror that David had anticipated every move she would make. The evidence Jake found, the FBI investigation, even her moment of false victory, had all been part of a larger trap. You're going to call Kate right now, David continued, and you're going to instruct her to accept the original prenup terms, $50,000, and you disappear quietly. If you don't, the harassment charges will be the least of your problems. What else do you have planned? David's laugh was cold. Sarah, you have no idea how deep this goes, but you're about to find out. As police sirens approached her house, Sarah realized she wasn't just fighting a divorce anymore. She was fighting for her life. The arrest happened at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was drinking coffee in her kitchen when she saw the FBI vehicles surrounding her house through the window. This time they weren't just searching, they were taking her away. Sarah Mitchell, Carter, you're under arrest for criminal harassment, stalking, and making terroristic threats across state lines. The handcuffs were cold against her wrists. As they led her to the police car, photographers captured every humiliating moment. Sarah kept her head down, but she could hear the reporters shouting questions. Did you threaten to hurt Amber Rose's baby? Are you having a mental breakdown? Do you regret stalking your husband's pregnant girlfriend? The booking process was degrading. Fingerprints, photos, strip search, orange jumpsuit. Sarah had watched enough crime shows to know what to expect, but the reality was worse than any television portrayal. Her cellmate was a woman named Rita, who had been arrested for check fraud. First time? Rita asked, noting Sarah's obvious distress. Hopefully the only time. That's what they all say, honey. What are you in for? They think I threatened my ex-husband's pregnant girlfriend. Rita laughed bitterly. Men, they'll destroy your whole life and then act like they're the victims. Sarah's bail hearing was set for the following morning. Kate arrived with grim news about the evidence against her. The prosecution has phone records, email logs, and surveillance footage that appears to show you near Amber's apartment multiple times, Kate explained through the bulletproof glass. The digital evidence is extensive and very convincing. But I never went to her apartment. I never sent those messages. I believe you, but proving digital evidence was fabricated is incredibly difficult. We're talking about sophisticated spoofing of IP addresses, phone numbers, and email servers. Sarah felt her remaining hope evaporating. What about Jake's investigation? The evidence that David framed me for the embezzlement? That's a separate case. The harassment charges are state-level crimes with their own evidence. The federal prosecutor is treating them as unrelated to the financial fraud. Yeah, and Kate leaned closer to the glass. Sarah, they're offering a plea deal, 2 years in minimum security prison, 5 years probation, and a restraining order, keeping you away from David and Amber permanently. 2 years, Sarah's voice cracked, for crimes I didn't commit. The alternative is going to trial against overwhelming evidence and risking 10 to 15 years if convicted on all counts. That night alone in her cell, Sarah lay on the thin mattress staring at the ceiling. She thought about her parents, both dead now, and wondered what they would think of their daughter in prison. She thought about the marketing career she had abandoned, the dreams she had deferred, the identity she had lost. Maybe she should take the plea deal. 2 years would be horrible but survivable. She could serve her time quietly and try to rebuild afterward, though she knew a felony conviction would make employment nearly impossible. Her court-appointed attorney visited the next morning with even worse news. Mrs. Carter, there's been a development. Amber Rose was hospitalized last night with pregnancy complications. She's claiming the stress of your alleged threats caused her to go into early labor. Sarah felt the walls closing in completely. Is the baby okay? The baby is fine, but Miss Rose is claiming emotional trauma. The prosecutor is considering upgrading the charges to include assault and endangering the welfare of a child. Sarah stared at her lawyer in disbelief. This is insane. I'm being blamed for someone else's pregnancy complications. I strongly recommend you accept the plea deal before they withdraw it. If Amber Rose's baby is born prematurely or has any health issues, you could be looking at 20 years. That afternoon, Sarah called Kate to accept the plea deal. She was broken, defeated, and out of options. David had won completely. But as she was about to sign the papers, a guard interrupted the meeting. Miss Carter, you have a visitor. Says he's your father. Sarah looked at Kate in confusion. My father died 10 years ago. Ma'am, he has identification and says it's urgent. Something about your adoption records. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. She had been adopted as an infant, but her adoptive parents had never told her anything about her biological family. They said the records were sealed and that her birth parents had requested no contact. I'll see him, she said. The man waiting in the visitor's room was in his late 60s, tall and distinguished with silver hair and kind eyes. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to power. Sarah, he said, his voice thick with emotion. My name is Frank Wellington. I'm your biological father, and I'm here to help you. Sarah stared at this stranger who claimed to be her father. I don't understand. My adoption was sealed. I've been looking for you for 45 years, Frank said. I hired investigators, contacted agencies, fought legal battles to find you. When I saw your story on the news, I knew immediately. You look exactly like your mother. He pulled out a faded photograph of a young woman who could have been Sarah's twin. Your mother's name was Linda Mitchell. She died in a car accident when you were 3 months old. I was 23, devastated and completely unprepared to raise a baby alone. Sarah felt tears she had been holding back for weeks finally spilling over. Why now? Why didn't you find me before? Because I'm a coward who let fear and grief keep me from fighting harder, Frank said simply. But I'm not going to let you face this alone. You're my daughter, and I'm going to make sure you get the justice you deserve. He leaned forward. Sarah, do you know who Frank Wellington is? She shook her head. I own Wellington Oil. We're one of the largest independent oil companies in America. I'm worth approximately $800 million. His smile was fierce. And I'm about to use every penny of it to destroy the man who tried to destroy my daughter. For the first time in months, Sarah felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Frank Wellington didn't just hire Sarah a new legal team. He hired an army. Within 24 hours, three of the country's most prominent criminal defense attorneys were working on her case, supported by digital forensics experts, private investigators, and PR specialists. The first breakthrough came from the forensics team. They discovered that the threatening messages to Amber had been sent using sophisticated software that spoofed Sarah's IP address and device signatures. The timestamps showed the messages were sent from locations where Sarah had provable alibis. Someone with advanced technical knowledge orchestrated this, the lead forensics expert explained to Sarah and Frank. This wasn't amateur hour. Whoever did this had access to professional-grade spoofing tools and intimate knowledge of your digital footprint. The second breakthrough was even more damaging to David's credibility. Wellington Oil's corporate security team discovered that David owed money to criminal organizations in 3 countries. His gambling debts weren't just to casinos. They were to loan sharks connected to international crime syndicates. Your ex-husband is desperate, Frank told Sarah as they reviewed the evidence. Men who owe this kind of money to these people will do anything to survive, including frame their wives for crimes they didn't commit. Frank's influence became apparent when Sarah's bail was suddenly reduced from $500,000 to $50,000. The same judge who had denied her bail request twice suddenly found the evidence less compelling than initially believed. Money talks, Frank said simply when Sarah questioned the sudden change. But more importantly, power talks, and I have both. Sarah was released pending trial, but she couldn't return to her Malibu house. The media circus was too intense, and Frank's security team was concerned about her safety. Instead, she moved into a suite at the Beverly Hills Hotel under an assumed name. The real game changer came when Frank's team discovered Wellington Oil's connection to Carter Technologies. Frank pulled out a thick folder during their strategy meeting. Sarah Wellington Oil provides cloud storage and computing services to hundreds of companies, including Carter Technologies. Frank's smile was predatory. We host 60% of their data infrastructure. Sarah began to understand the implications. You could shut them down. I could shut them down completely. Every server, every backup, every piece of data that keeps David's company running goes through our systems. Frank leaned back in his chair. But that would be the nuclear option. I prefer surgical strikes. Instead of destroying Carter Technologies immediately, Frank began applying pressure strategically. Key contracts mysteriously weren't renewed. Server maintenance schedules became less reliable. The company's stock price began dropping as performance issues mounted. David tried to reach Sarah through intermediaries, but Frank's security team intercepted every attempt. He's panicking, Frank's head of security reported. Our sources say he's been making increasingly frantic calls to his gambling contacts trying to negotiate payment extensions. Meanwhile, Jake Brooks was working with Frank's investigative team to trace the source of the fabricated evidence against Sarah. They discovered that David had hired a firm specializing in digital reputation management, essentially professional frame-up artists who created fake evidence for wealthy clients. This company has done this before, Jake explained. They've helped at least a dozen wealthy men frame their wives during divorce proceedings. We're talking about a criminal conspiracy that goes far beyond your case. The revelation that David had hired professionals to frame her should have made Sarah angry. Instead, she felt oddly relieved. The sophistication of the setup meant she wasn't crazy or paranoid. David really had orchestrated an incredibly complex scheme to destroy her. The question now, Frank said, is how we want to handle the endgame. We have enough evidence to clear you completely and probably send David to prison for 20 years. But we can also make him suffer first. Sarah thought about the months of humiliation, the terror of facing prison, the complete destruction of her reputation and sense of self. David had tried to erase her existence to save himself. I want him to feel exactly what he put me through, she said. I want him to understand what it's like to lose everything. Frank's smile was sharp as winter. Then let's give him a masterclass in real power. The first strike came through the media. Frank owned significant stakes in several major publications, and suddenly investigative journalists were very interested in David Carter's gambling debts and connections to international crime syndicates. The second strike was financial. Wellington Oil quietly informed other vendors that Carter Technologies was a poor credit risk. Within days, the company was having trouble securing basic business services. The third strike was personal. Frank's investigators discovered that Amber Rose had been recording her conversations with David for months, including discussions about framing Sarah. When offered immunity from prosecution in exchange for her testimony, Amber quickly agreed to cooperate. David never mentioned you had a powerful father, Amber told Sarah during a carefully orchestrated meeting. If I had known you were Frank Wellington's daughter, I never would have gotten involved. Sarah studied the young woman who had helped destroy her life. Amber looked exhausted and scared, her pregnancy weighing heavily on her slight frame. Why did you help him? Sarah asked. Because I was stupid and desperate, Amber said honestly. David promised me movie roles, modeling contracts, a life I thought I wanted. By the time I realized what kind of man he really was, I was pregnant and terrified. As they prepared to release the recorded conversations publicly, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months, complete confidence in victory. But David Carter had one final card to play, and it was going to force Sarah to make an impossible choice. David's last desperate move came through the one person Sarah hadn't expected, her adoptive mother's sister, Aunt Carol. The elderly woman called Sarah in tears, explaining that men had visited her Phoenix nursing home, claiming to be federal investigators. They said you were in serious trouble, honey. They said I needed to sign some papers about your childhood to help with your case. Sarah's blood ran cold. Aunt Carol, what kind of papers? Something about your adoption being illegal. They said there were problems with how your parents got you and that you might be deported if we couldn't prove your citizenship. Frank's security team was in Phoenix within hours. They discovered that David had hired investigators to dig into Sarah's adoption records, looking for any irregularity that could be used against her. The federal investigators were imposters, trying to get Carol to sign false statements about Sarah's adoption. This is desperation, Frank told Sarah. He's grasping for anything that might hurt you. But the incident revealed something else David knew about Frank's identity as Sarah's biological father, which meant he was planning something even more dangerous. The trap was sprung 3 days later. Sarah received a call from someone claiming to be a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, requesting an interview about her sudden inheritance from her oil tycoon father. I'm sorry, but there's been no inheritance, Sarah said carefully. Ma'am, our sources show that Frank Wellington recently transferred significant assets into your name. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. Our readers would be very interested in how this impacts your criminal case. Sarah hung up immediately and called Frank. Someone thinks you've given me money. The Wall Street Journal is preparing a story about an inheritance. Frank was quiet for a moment. Sarah, I need to tell you something. 3 months ago, before I knew you were in trouble, I did set up a trust fund in your name. It was my way of trying to provide for you, even though we'd never met. How much money are we talking about? $200 million. Sarah felt the room spin. Frank, if that comes out now, it'll look like you're buying my freedom. It'll destroy our credibility. I know, David's investigators must have discovered the trust somehow. He's going to claim that your legal defense has purchased justice, that you're only free because you bought your way out of legitimate charges. The story broke that evening. The headline read, Oil heiress buys freedom, billionaire father's money corrupts justice system. The article painted Sarah as a spoiled rich woman using family money to escape consequences for her crimes. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Hashtag privileged princess trended on social media. Editorial writers condemned the two-tiered justice system. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse calling for Sarah's immediate imprisonment. Even worse, the revelation triggered a federal investigation into whether Frank had used his wealth to improperly influence Sarah's case. The FBI announced they were reviewing all of Frank's interactions with Sarah's legal team. This is exactly what David wanted, Sarah told Frank as they watched the news coverage. He's turned my biological father finding me into evidence of corruption. Frank looked older than his 68 years. I'm sorry, Sarah. I was trying to protect you, and I've made everything worse. Sarah realized that David had forced her into an impossible position. She could accept Frank's help and be painted as a corrupt rich woman buying justice. Or she could reject his help and face David's frame-up with inadequate resources. There's a third option, she said slowly. We stop playing defense and go nuclear. Frank raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? David thinks he's been so clever playing chess while everyone else plays checkers. But he's made one crucial mistake. He assumed I would stay silent and take whatever punishment he decided I deserved. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Jake Brooks. Jake, how quickly can you publish a story? Depends on the story. Why? Because I'm about to give you exclusive access to everything. David's gambling debts, his criminal connections, the digital evidence of him framing me, Amber's recorded confessions, the fake federal investigators, all of it. Sarah, are you sure once this is public, there's no going back? Sarah looked at Frank, then out at the city lights of Los Angeles. Somewhere out there, David Carter thought he had won. He thought he had successfully destroyed her life and gotten away with it. Jake, I want you to publish every detail. I want the world to see exactly what kind of man David Carter really is. And I want them to understand that when you try to destroy someone's life, sometimes they have the power to destroy yours right back. As Sarah began planning her complete exposure of David's crimes, she realized this had never been about money or revenge. It had been about refusing to disappear quietly when a powerful man decided she was expendable. David Carter was about to learn that he had picked the wrong woman to destroy. The press conference was scheduled for noon on a Friday at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Sarah had chosen the location deliberately. It was where she and David had celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary back when she still believed in their marriage. The ballroom was packed with reporters from every major news outlet. Camera crews lined the walls, and photographers jostled for position. Sarah walked to the podium wearing a navy blue suit that Frank had bought for her, looking every inch the oil heiress the media had painted her as. My name is Sarah Mitchell Carter Wellington. She began using her full name for the first time publicly. 6 months ago, my life was destroyed when my husband's affair was exposed on social media. Today, I want to tell you the real story about what happened next. She gestured to the screens that flanked the podium. What you're about to see is evidence of the most sophisticated criminal conspiracy I could have imagined. My ex-husband, David Carter, didn't just cheat on me. He spent 2 years planning to frame me for his own crimes. The first slide showed David's gambling debts documented in casino records and loan shark communications. David Carter owes approximately $18 million to criminal organizations in Las Vegas, Macau, and Eastern Europe. These debts drove him to embezzle money from his own company. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, surveillance photos, recorded phone calls. The room was completely silent as Sarah methodically destroyed David's reputation with facts and documentation. When the FBI began investigating the missing money, David decided to frame me. He hired a company called Digital Reputation Solutions to create fake evidence that I was the embezzler. Sarah played recordings of David discussing the frame-up with his hired conspirators. His voice was clear and unmistakable as he detailed plans to use Sarah's computer access to create false transfers and plant evidence in her accounts. But framing me for embezzlement wasn't enough. When I started fighting back, David escalated to criminal harassment charges. These text messages and emails that were supposedly sent from my accounts were actually created using sophisticated spoofing software. The forensic evidence was damning. Technical analyses showed exactly how David's team had faked Sarah's digital fingerprints on hundreds of threatening messages. David Carter is not a wronged husband. He is a criminal who tried to destroy my life to cover up his own crimes. And he almost succeeded. Sarah paused, looking directly into the cameras. But he made one crucial mistake. He underestimated the woman he had been married to for 15 years. The final slide was a photograph of Sarah and Frank together. My biological father, Frank Wellington, found me during the darkest period of this ordeal. Not because I asked for his help, but because he had been searching for me for 45 years. The trust fund that the media has criticized was created months before David's crimes were exposed. It wasn't blood money to buy my freedom. It was a father's attempt to provide for a daughter he had been forced to give up as a baby. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she reached her conclusion. David Carter thought he could make me disappear. He thought he could steal my money, destroy my reputation, and send me to prison for his crimes. He thought I was weak because I had spent 15 years supporting his career instead of building my own. She leaned into the microphone. He was wrong. The questions from reporters came in a flood. Sarah answered, each one calmly and precisely, providing additional evidence and documentation for every claim she had made. Mrs. Carter, what do you want to happen to your ex-husband? I want him to face justice for his crimes, all of them. The embezzlement, the framing, the harassment, and the conspiracy to obstruct justice. Will you be seeking damages in civil court? I will be seeking to recover every penny he stole plus punitive damages for the deliberate infliction of emotional distress. Do you forgive Amber Rose for her role in this? Sarah considered the question. Amber was manipulated by a master manipulator. She made mistakes, but she also found the courage to tell the truth when it mattered. I hope she can build a good life for herself and her child. As the press conference ended, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: complete vindication. The evidence was public, the truth was exposed, and David's reputation was destroyed beyond repair. But the real satisfaction came 3 hours later when Frank's head of security called with an update. David Carter was arrested at LAX trying to board a flight to a non-extradition country. He had fake passports and was carrying $2 million in cryptocurrency. The FBI is calling it consciousness of guilt. Sarah smiled for the first time in 6 months. David Carter had always believed he was the smartest person in any room. Today he had learned the difference between intelligence and wisdom. The coverage that evening was wall-to-wall vindication for Sarah. Editorial writers praised her courage. Social media rallied behind her story. Justice for Sarah. Sarah trended worldwide. Most importantly, the federal prosecutor announced that all charges against Sarah were being dropped, and that David Carter was facing a 17-count indictment, including embezzlement, fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. As Sarah sat in her hotel suite that night, watching David's perp walk on the evening news, she realized that her nightmare was finally over. But more than that, her new life was just beginning. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the conference room of Wellington Oil headquarters in Houston, looking out at the city skyline where her new life was taking shape. The woman who had once been a forgotten housewife was now the president of the Wellington Foundation for Women's Empowerment, overseeing a $200 million initiative to help women rebuild their lives after financial abuse. The foundation's first major project was a legal defense fund for women facing false accusations during divorce proceedings. They had already helped 37 women across the country, providing them with the kind of high-powered legal representation that had saved Sarah's life. The latest quarterly report, her assistant handed her a folder. The foundation was exceeding all projections. They had partnered with domestic violence organizations, law schools, and women's shelters to create a comprehensive support network. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Kate Morrison, who had moved to Houston to serve as the foundation's general counsel. David's sentencing hearing is set for next Tuesday. 22 years federal prison, no possibility of parole for 12 years. 22 years. David would be 72 when he was released, assuming he lived that long. The man who had tried to steal her life would spend most of his remaining years in a federal penitentiary. There was a knock on her office door. Frank entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, a routine they had developed during the months of working together to build the foundation. "How are you feeling about next week?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Relieved," Sarah said honestly. "Vindicated, ready to move forward completely." "Any regrets about the civil settlement?" Sarah shook her head. The civil lawsuit had resulted in a $50 million judgment against David, though collecting it would be difficult given his legal expenses and restitution requirements. More importantly, it had legally established his guilt and her innocence for the historical record. "What about Amber?" Frank asked. Sarah had been following Amber's story through the media. The young woman had given birth to a healthy daughter and was raising her in Portland, far from the Hollywood scene that had nearly destroyed both their lives. She had also become an advocate for women who had been manipulated by powerful men. "I hope she finds peace," Sarah said. "We were both victims of the same predator, just in different ways." Frank nodded. "She sent a letter to the foundation yesterday. She wants to make a donation and volunteer for our advocacy program." Sarah felt a surprising surge of warmth. Maybe healing really was possible for everyone involved. Her computer chimed with a new email from one of the women the foundation was helping. Lisa Martinez from Phoenix was a 48-year-old teacher whose husband had tried to frame her for stealing from their school district. With the foundation's help, she had not only cleared her name, but discovered that her husband had been embezzling for years. "Mrs. Wellington," the email read, "I wanted you to know that the charges against me were dropped today. More importantly, I started my new job as principal of Desert Ridge Elementary School. None of this would have been possible without the foundation's support. You saved my life just like you saved your own." Sarah printed the email and added it to the growing collection on her bulletin board. Each letter represented a woman who had refused to disappear quietly when someone tried to destroy her. Each story proved that recovery was possible, that justice could be achieved, and that women could be stronger than the people who underestimated them. As the sun set over Houston, Sarah reflected on the incredible years she had survived. She had lost a marriage, a home, and an identity she had built over 15 years. But she had gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. Her phone rang, Jake Brooks calling from Los Angeles. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that the series on David's case won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting." "Jake, that's incredible. You deserve it." "We deserve it. Your courage to go public made the investigation possible." After she hung up, Sarah walked to her office window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there were women facing the same nightmare she had survived, women who thought they were powerless, trapped without options. The Wellington Foundation would find them, help them, and show them that no one was ever truly powerless, that justice was possible, that starting over at any age was not only possible, but could lead to a life better than anything they had previously imagined. Sarah Mitchell Carter in Wellington had learned that sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you can become the foundation for the best thing you ever do. And she was just getting started. As she prepared to leave the office, Sarah's reflection caught her eye in the window. The woman looking back at her was confident, purposeful, and completely in control of her own destiny. She barely resembled the scared housewife who had discovered her husband's affair on Instagram 6 months earlier. That woman had been destroyed completely. This woman had been born from her ashes, and she was magnificent. The future stretched ahead of her, full of possibility, purpose, and power. And Sarah Wellington was ready for all of it.